Welcome to the Futurebuild Podcast, where we spotlight drivers of positive impact within the built environment. I'm your host, Martin Hurn, Futurebuild Event Director, and today we have the pleasure of hosting Mina Hasman, a recognised leader in sustainability and climate advocacy within the built environment. Mina is Sustainability Director at SOM, where she leads projects that push the boundaries of sustainable design and innovation. In this episode, we'll delve into Mina's career journey, her views on the current state of the built environment, the importance of climate advocacy, and the need for a common language in carbon literacy. Mina, an absolute pleasure to have you on the podcast today.
Thank you for inviting me, Martin. I'm really excited to be here.
Great. Your name has come up on many of the podcasts already, so I'm really excited. But I'd like to almost start with, for maybe the people that don't know you, a little bit about yourself, your personal journey in sustainability and your career as well.
Sure. So I am an architect and environmental engineer, but let me tell you how I came here first. So I think my first sort of career journey started with architecture because I don't think I knew always that I wanted to be an architect, but I was fascinated with art, the way that enriched my life through its endless creativity that it offered. And I used art even as a child, drawing and sketching and collaging, any sort of art, really as a tool to communicate and communicate the messages that I wanted to deliver. But also really, I was curious to see the people's reaction to those messages and whether I was being clear, with the way I was sketching, for example, if the message was coming across. And eventually sort of this increased my interest in understanding how people respond to visual things and how people respond to an unspoken language. And I realized that more and more as I became aware, for me, that unspoken understanding became when I was occupying a space, a building, whether it be a public space, but mostly buildings. And that's why sort of intrinsically, I think my interest in architecture emerged. And so that's how sort of slowly my architecture journey started. And I went to Cornell University to study architecture. And it's actually there, that's where my passion for sustainability emerged and this is due to one person, and that was my professor called Kevin Pratt, who was a visiting professor at the time at Cornell. And he talked so passionately about passive design, about vernacular architecture. And this is over 20 years ago, but he showed us how parametric design tools can help inform how buildings can be designed according to sun and wind and so forth. And I was completely blown by it. And that's so he's the reason why I wanted to focus more on sustainability. And even when I was studying at Cornell, I said, when I graduate, I want to do masters on sustainability, really understand the science behind how buildings are put together, function, but most important, how building can respond to their environment and to people. And so I came here about 14 years ago to study at the Architecture Association in their Sustainable Environmental Design and Engineering program, and here I am.
Fantastic. And it's quite interesting, I've spoken to a lot of guests on the podcast who started architects and they've sort of moved away slightly. Do you see there's a change in role of what an architect is?
I think so slowly. I mean, I'll answer this in two sort of parts. One is over the last perhaps decade or 2 decades, the industry has been creating more specialist roles. So a lot of architects have been specializing in certain aspects of that are related to the built environment sector, whether it be like heritage or, heritage design, or whether it be, even renovation became a specialism on its own, or tall buildings. I work for SOM. SOM is known for building the sort of very complex structures. And so there has been these specialisms emerging. But I think now we are sort of going back and trying to really understand, perhaps back in the time, how even before my time, how architects have really functioned. A true architect was sort of the mastermind of it all and knew all that knowledge. And I'm not saying every architect should have all the knowledge today or know all those expertise, but I don't think every architect should rely on a specialist to be able to deliver a portion of their job. So I think now we're going back to becoming the master builders and masterminders of all of that sort of holistic knowledge that the built environment design and delivery and operation, everything is encompassing within under the umbrella of the architect as a master builder.
Your current role is Sustainability Director at SOM, and you talk about specialities or specialist areas, obviously. Yours is carbon. What sort of led you down that path?
Sustainability has always been a part of my sort of a personal passion. And I realized this, I'll just answer this a bit longer because I think it's important to understand where my heart is. And I think that's the reason why I don't see my job as a job today, but I see it as an extension of my life, of who I am. And I realized this. At the time, I didn't realize it because I was just a kid, but now I consciously realize that this was sort of at the heart of my personal mission in this world. And when I was 7 years old, we went to a school trip to Cappadocia in Turkey. That's where I studied. And I remember these sort of cave structures, being in one of them, and it was 50 degrees outside. And inside, I remember being cold, and I didn't understand how I was cold. And eventually that intrigued me in understanding how materials and sort of structures really work, and why, when there was no air conditioning, how did we feel so cold inside these cave structures? And then eventually, so those are some of the fundamental principles of what we apply passive design today with thermal mass and everything. So this is from 7 years of age. So that's how my journey has come to be. And also when I first started at SOM, I have been working there for the last 12 years in the London office, and majority of my career has been with SOM. So when I first started, I was hired as an architect to sort of coordinate and lead, sort of architecture projects, like in a typical projects. But I was trying to drive sort of sustainability vision and mission of the projects together with our team much more. And eventually, and sustainability has always been at the forefront of SOM because even our founder, Nathaniel Owings, many decades ago said that if, our success will only be measured if we found the right balance between the environment and people and the built structure. So I knew that SOM has the right foundations for sort of really demonstrating continuous leadership in this agenda. And they knew that I was very passionate about it among many other peers across our firm. So I have been very focused on sort of advocating and championing for sustainable design approaches, perhaps a bit more than others. And there is always some individuals that are more passionate about certain things across the firm. And that's how I eventually slowly transitioned to, because I could not stop talking about sustainability. So I slowly transitioned into the role that I am today. Over time, it really organically evolved, and have been sort of now working together with so many across the firm in different disciplines, because we have interiors, urban planning, structural engineering, any kind of engineering and architecture within SOM. So I work together with everyone, together with our rest of our what we call sustainable engineering studio, to really advance this agenda.
I bet over the last 14 years that studio's grown, and that approach, and you're probably not the outliner anymore.
No.
For those that don't know you, and I'd be amazed if they don't within the built environment, you're so actively involved, probably across so many different roles. You're obviously a REBA council member, you're a judge, Sterling and SOM medals. You've just recently been made the Construction Industry Council's climate change chair. You still tutor at the Bartlett, the AA, Manchester. You're actively involved in Letty. You're an author, of course, as well. How do you get the time? How do you balance?
I think when something is a true passion of individuals, I think this doesn't become a burden or a job, as I mentioned before. And I think even though on paper it looks like I'm involved in all of those, and it is true, I'm involved in all of those things, but I think the way that I'm efficiently spending my time outside of SOM to be able to contribute to the industry at large, and also academia at large, is because I'm sort of championing and advocating for the same things. And, under the different sort of umbrella organizations, my passion is on climate literacy. My passion is on really lobbying the government to sort of regulate the right or put in place the right policies. My passion is about creating the right tools and frameworks for people to utilize as resources to be able to advance their work. So I spread myself thin. It looks like I spread myself thin across different organizations, but I'm just having the same conversation, for very crudely describing the same conversation with different people, which means that I'm actually trying to bring together the whole industry and academia under the same mission and vision, if that makes sense.
Breaking down those silos.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
And actually, just touching on that, what's your perspective on the current state of the built environment?
I think, and we have been talking about this for the last few years, but I'm going to repeat. I think we're doing slightly better when we were before a few years ago, but I think there's still a huge lack of true and genuine collaboration across and I'm going to change our wording and I'm going to say value chain, not supply chain. And I'll touch upon that briefly, but I think as architects, engineers, designers, policymakers, investors, developers, we're still not working as seamlessly or as collectively as we should. And that's the reason we only see perhaps certain areas of improvement or exemplary few case studies, if I can describe them that way, across the industry, rather than a streamlined sort of mainstream evolution that the sector needs to face, in my humble opinion. And I speak this as Mina. So I think it's important to shift the conversation, perhaps even from collaboration to co-creation, so that we can actually collectively feel that sense of ownership in all aspects of the work that we're doing in different parts of the sector. And I would like to talk about not the supply chain, because we've been talking about supply chain, even though there is still lack of collaboration across the supply chain. I want to talk about the value chain, because a lot of the decisions we take today in any given project, we're usually very much looking within the constraints of that project, whether it's that contract, that project side, that project team. But how do our responsibility, I think, goes much beyond that. So how can we instill that sense of ownership that is much more longer lasting than the end of our contract, than the end of our project delivery, than the end of team disassembly, if I can describe it that way.
Talk about climate literacy, and there seems to be a deep understanding of carbon and climate within maybe the architectural field, but maybe less so as you get higher up, to the developers or the client. What's your perspective on that?
I think it's true, and I think it would be unfair to ask anyone to be an expert or subject matter expert, and that's where the slight criticism comes. And I'm also labeled as an expert or specialist in this field, so I wouldn't want any specialists to get offended. But I think that's where the sort of missed opportunity comes with specialisms, because we say, well, only an expert could understand what we're saying, because the climate change or sustainability has been so technically driven, rightfully, because it's science. It's science about design, science about buildings, the built environment. But I think what's our response, and I'm going to take it back on all of us that are working within the built environment sector, really, and especially those technical experts, really to distill down the language, to really make it much more approachable and much more relatable to clients who are not required to be an expert, who don't need to really understand the details of embodied carbon, but they need to understand why embodied carbon matters. And I think we need to really make it into a very simple language that can relate, maybe sort of with certain analogies that they will be more familiar with, so that we can really deliver the message. I think we are missing delivering the message effectively. And I think that's the reason why sustainability and sort of climate related actions, or embodied carbon and carbon in general, sits on the side in most people's mind, because that's the experts' problem, or experts are going to talk amongst the experts and I don't need to engage with. There is that perhaps kind of attitude which we need to really break down, because we need everyone around the table to really understand why we are even talking about this.
Is that need for a common language? Can you give us some examples of maybe what's working?
Sure. Maybe and I'll give an example even from my experiences at SOM, is that I think this breaking down the technical language to a language that anyone can understand is a fundamental part of a good starting point, is about building the right foundations. But there's also an element of how we need to make it relatable to clients so that they would want to speak that common language. And I'll say perhaps there are two aspects of the common language. One is how we engage with lay individuals, if I can call them that way, non-experts, and they don't need to be experts. And one is how can we create a common language across the industry where we all need to have a much better understanding and much more detailed and technical understanding than our clients do. But let me tackle the client side of the equation first, because that is building on the previous question that you asked, Martin, is that I think, so once we need to break it down to a simple language, we also need to come from the perspective that clients will value the most. We cannot simply go and say, we want to reduce or deliver net zero carbon building because we want to save the planet. Hopefully most people would want to do that, but some people don't. It's not a part of I don't want to say don't care, but it's not a part of their KPIs. It's not a part of their success measures. If it's not on the numbers, on the balance sheet, if it's not a part of the success measure, how can we get that message delivered so that they can incorporate that as part of their value proposition or value evaluation? And that only comes, and I have firsthand experience with clients working for some of our projects in the recent past, is that where we had this instance where it wasn't a part of a client's brief or it wasn't a part of client's KPI, then we talked about from the perspective that they value the most. So they were, an example, a client was interested in penetrating the UK market for the first time, the London market actually specifically. And a foreign client who wants to come here, for them, reputation is everything, because it's the first time that they're going to build that reputation with that one project or asset that we're working on with them. And even it was at a cost that they're willing to pay extra to be able to bring the project to be net zero carbon. And this is a few years ago when many people didn't even talk about net zero carbon, because they knew that was going to be a good reputation builder element, or that was going to be a good badge for them to have, if I can crudely describe it that way. So I think it's important. So for them, because reputation was important, then we went and talked to them about market trends and what the London market looks like and so forth. We didn't talk about from a carbon perspective. We talked about from the market trend and about building their reputation perspective. And I said, well, we can all do all of this if we do this project to be a net zero carbon building, because think about the benefits that you can get as a client. And they were bought in it, within a matter of minutes, I would say. And we didn't even need to spend too lengthy time. So I think it's really important to really talk about the carbon, even though we may come and say we really want to reduce carbon in our projects. If the client doesn't value carbon as much as we do, then we need to talk about what they value the most. If it's cost is always an issue, or valuable point for clients, but cost, reputation, or other things, other priorities, and then sort of attach the carbon story to that. And then they're much more willing to engage and really act on it and define it as a key performance indicator, an evaluation parameter in their end result in the end. And if I can also describe just very briefly the common language within the industry. So this is something that is so important, because leaving sort of our clients or, the more lay people aside, within the industry, we talk a lot about net zero carbon, but I think to this date, I honestly don't believe that we all mean the same thing. And I do hope with the UK net zero carbon building standards and sort of other tools that are going to emerge and are emerging can help define further clarity on all of that. And Simon Sturgis and many others across the industry, including myself, have been doing a lot of work in defining what net zero carbon is. But I think until it becomes a common practice, we really need to understand how we can, beyond net zero carbon, how we can build that common language. And this is something that we passionately believed, myself with a couple of colleagues across the industry and academia and from different disciplines. We believed that there was a gap in the industry. And a few years ago, we came together, created the Climate Framework Initiative, which eventually produced a taxonomy, a new language around sustainability and climate change, and a framework for people to use as a tool, as a starting point to build their training programs or education courses and so forth, both in academia and industry, so that there is a streamlined language and a shared language that we can all speak. That's correct. Well, the development of Part Z actually came independent, but in individuals that have been involved within the Part Z have also been involved within the climate framework and are also now involved with the UK Net Zero Carbon Building Standards and LETI. So it's usually the usual suspects that are part of the similar initiatives, I think, that are pushing the agenda across the industry.
So a new government with obviously a large ambition to build a lot of houses, relaxing planning rules, but also committed to mass retrofit. Does that pose new opportunities?
I think it definitely does. And I'm just hopeful that we will have the right capacity to deliver on that ambition. I think the ambition is definitely plausible and something that we in the industry have been looking for, I think probably for the last few years. But I worry that because the demand is going to be very fast and at scale. And in general, and this is in the UK context, but the similar scenarios exist elsewhere in Africa where cities are being built from scratch. So there is a huge change that needs to happen and will continue to happen across the built environment sector. And it's really important to understand whether there is enough capacity and capabilities. And that goes perhaps back to the question is, do we have enough skills to deliver, or the right skills, not enough, but the right skills. And there has been so much focus on the industry on this for the last few years. And I say, before we can even talk about skills, which is something that you can build on knowledge with experience, we need to have the right knowledge. And I still don't think that we have the right mainstream level of knowledge across the industry at all levels of the value chain. And that's why Climate Framework hopefully can be used as that tool to build that mainstream knowledge. And then with experience of building projects, doing buildings and so forth, people can build the right skills and collectively contribute to the larger capacity building of the sector.
I'd love to get your thoughts on sort of the place of standards, and I know you're involved with LEED and BREEAM, and sort of the future direction of those maybe.
I think the standards have been quite instrumental, especially back in the time when BREEAM, LEED emerged. Many of the tools, if I can call them that way, or resources that we currently have today didn't exist. So I think they were very useful to help define a structured framework for buildings to be designed with or against, so that there are no unintended consequences created, and there is a fine balance between commercial sort of aspects of a building versus people's well-being and people's and well-being and environmental health. I think moving forward, it would be great if, and this is again Mina speaking, but I think it would be great if there could be a greater emergence of all of those standards, because I'm mindful when I say this, because I understand that there has been so much work, and this also, there's a commercial sort of value on using those standards, and there's a certain reputation that one can build on those. But I wish there was a sort of emergence of all of that to be able to really holistically deliver on sort of real sustainable outcomes, even in projects where those standards or green rating systems or certifications are not targeted. I think the green rating systems will exist, and they will always have a place, and they're very valuable, but not everyone can afford them. And so in parallel to them, there also needs to be something, and that's the reason why Climate Framework came together and exists today, because Climate Framework takes everything and anything possible with universal standards, green rating systems, UN Sustainable Development Goals, and merges them in one place, and it's freely available for everyone to really use as a tool and as a resource to design with sustainability in mind, or more than in mind, at the core of the decision-making process.
Right, I think they promote exemplary buildings, I don't think they are just a tick box exercise, because I think that they produce some amazing, excellent buildings. But there seems to be a sort of a gap which maybe zero carbon home standards, when that was ceased, sort of left behind. I think we need to be building good quality, energy efficient homes moving forward, and I think that's going to be a real challenge, as you said, with the skills gap as well. I'd love to get your opinion on sort of maybe the importance of innovating and innovation. I know it's a term that's sort of bounded around, but especially at SLM, you do some amazing sort of future thinking and material innovations. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Of course, and I'm really thankful that you brought up that topic, because I think a lot of people think in general that innovation requires a lot of time and money, and only certain organizations can afford that. On one aspect, I agree, but on the other hand, that's not true, because I think we should and we ought to innovate every step of the way. And it can be a very incremental change that we may do in a project, and very small change in one project that can become innovation factor or innovative factor of that element that can help hopefully scale to other projects. SOM, I think we're very blessed. I feel I'm a part of a very blessed team where we have the opportunity to invest time and money to really be able to deliver sort of big, sort of groundbreaking ideas, and not incremental changes, but and I think there's a place for both incremental changes, which we also do inevitably in our projects, and then separately dedicated time on research. And I think the two most exciting, more recent researches that we have been working on is on urban sequoia, where we envision buildings to be like trees, where they capture carbon from the atmosphere. And then another project most recent is on energy tower, where we envision tall buildings, which will inevitably have a place in the future of our urban landscape around the world, can be purposed as an energy storage structure. So those kind of really bold moves and bigger ideas is really exciting. And I'm really I feel very blessed and lucky to be able to be part of those conversations at the least with other subject matter experts within the firm and even beyond, because we have partners and collaborators always on those projects. And you touched upon the sort of material related research, and that's something we looked very deeply during our Urban Sequoia, when we first started Urban Sequoia a few years ago now. We've partnered with, at the time, a startup called Prometheus Materials, who are the scientists behind the sort of bio-based materials. This is not something that SOM has scientific knowledge on, but we were able to sort of partner with them and bring their material into a part of a design vision, which is what Urban Sequoia exemplifies.
There seems to be a real resurgence or growing demand for biomaterials. But still, we see sort of a reluctance to build with timber at the moment. And what do you see some of the things that are holding it back?
I think there are sort of key barriers to this state. And I'm actually, to a certain extent, I would say I'm still surprised that there is reluctance to build with timber. I understand why, but I'm surprised because I think timber has been around for a very long time, and there are historic buildings built out of timber, and that has been in place for over centuries. And there has been like precedence of how to build timber at scale and at height in a lot of the Scandinavian countries that we see to this date. So we definitely know that there shouldn't ideally be as many barriers as there are today, but there are. And I think one is that there is still perhaps a bit of a lack of sort of full awareness of the benefits and perhaps certain challenges that one needs to overcome to be able to deliver those benefits in timber projects. And so I think maybe showcasing more case studies around build structures that are out of timber, such as the examples I've mentioned in Scandinavia, or raising awareness on the benefits of timber construction more widely could help break down these misinformations around timber construction. Secondly is building regulations. So in general, and I'm going to contextualize this in a global context, not just in the UK, but building regulations don't often allow for or accommodate, let alone timber, but other even bio-based materials to be even considered as part of standard practice construction techniques today. And that requires a lot of lobbying of the government, raising awareness within government and policymakers and those key decision makers to be able to help embed some of that. I would say even like a bit of a flexibility on the alternative of materials to concrete and steel will be really helpful moving forward. And then thirdly, I think the cost. So there's still, I think timber construction can still be, depending on the context and geographic location and where the timber is coming from, and especially if there are limitations in the supply chain, which may also be a key barrier, sort of have a knock-on effect on other aspects of timber construction. I think cost. So it still can be slightly higher in cost than traditional construction, and that may be the reason why there isn't still a huge sort of a lot of why aren't all the buildings timber, for example, or majority of them, especially at lower rise structures. That might be the reason as well.
On another podcast we do Futurebuild, so a lot of time talking to startup community actually, and sort of the innovators, and something that comes up there. The barrier to sort of penetrating the market has always been certification and testing as well, because there's large costs to get into that. So, are you excited by any sort of startups or any innovations that are coming through that sort of seed funding? And
I think there are quite a few, and we're always keeping a very close eye on those that are specifically looking at bio-based materials, and we've partnered with Prometheus Materials I mentioned before, and there are others emerging doing fascinating work, and we're also looking into direct air capture, sort of energy storage, those kind of technology-focused startups, because we believe there is a great opportunity to integrate those perhaps larger scale technologies like direct air capture. I can give an example. Direct air capture is currently considered more for large scale industrial and agricultural sites, like with these huge fan looking like structures that you probably have seen, to capture all the carbon that is unabatable. But there hasn't really been scaled to buildings yet. There are some examples. There is one in Brooklyn, New York that I'm aware of, where the direct air capture sort of system or technology is incorporated into an existing cooling tower to be able to capture the carbon from that sort of system. But the way that we envision scaling down the direct air capture technology into a building, like the way we are presenting at Urban Sequoia, hasn't been done before. And we know that that's this technology that works well and is tested in other sectors needs to be brought into the built environment and construction sector scaled down, adjusted appropriately. And we're looking for startups that actually are enabled to do that. And even in our Urban Sequoia sort of research at the very beginning and throughout its evolution, we always have liaised with direct air capture experts, and there's a direct air capture coalition and so forth that we look to understand better how the technology can be transferred from this very large scale, massive, and from other sectors to the built environment sector.
Amazing. I want to ask you some questions around the REBA Climate Guide. So the author of that is sort of a year and a half, 2 years since it was published, and I'd love to get your opinion on sort of the impact it's had and maybe some of the progress that's happened since then.
Of course. So happy to share that. And thank you for asking the question. I think you were one of the first ones that have bought the book.
I did.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your support. I think I'm really excited. I hear that it's doing really well, that it's almost sold out. So I'm really excited about it. I'm excited about it because sort of as someone who's really put a lot of passion into this book. And I always, you hear me talk a lot about passion because I think a lot of my work is driven by my passion about this subject matter in general. And I put a lot of heart and hard work and passion into this book. And it's great to see that it's being appreciated and valued across the global built environment sector. I think the progress, I have sort of one-on-one engagements with individuals that have read the book, that have provided comments, and I greatly appreciate any feedback continuously, because I do hope there will be other editions of the book that we can help inform the future editions. But I greatly appreciate the fact that it has attracted a lot of interest internationally, and that was my mission behind it. And even though it has the RIBA in the title of it, I didn't want it to be seen as only for architects and those that are practicing in the UK. It really has a much wider remit, and it's for anyone and everyone. I say for any built environment actor who makes a key decision should read that book, because it's about raising general knowledge and awareness on key themes under the umbrella of sustainability and climate change, and it's about highlighting the interlinkages that exist between them. And I was giving a lecture at a university in Bhutan last month, and also at another organization in Jamaica a few months ago. So it's great that a lot of people are using this as a tool, and many people I think are using it more about as an educational tool, either building their sort of training programs around it or updating their academic curricula with some of those topics that are included within the RBA Climate Guide. But really great to see the uptake on it.
You touched on this earlier, but I'd love to get sort of some of your challenges really about how we should communicate sustainability, especially at a board level, maybe in your interactions with the clients and the developers. And we talked about this a little bit earlier as well, about sometimes cost always comes up as an issue, and so maybe some examples of how that's becoming less so.
I think, cost will always be at the top of the agenda, but I think it's important for us perhaps to better educate ourselves, for lack of a better description, to talk about sustainability in relation to cost, both whether it's about increasing upfront cost but saving longer term cost, or hopefully not increasing upfront cost but also saving long term cost. But I think cost should always be a part of our language, especially with clients at the board level, at the higher level. And I also think that it's really important to talk about real case studies, because a lot of our clients want to understand where this has been done before. We may be proposing an idea. Some are, I would say, more risk takers, and they are more willing to really put a stamp and just say this is the first of its kind. But others may want to know whether it has been done before, and if so, what other examples. So I think a part of that language is about showcasing the right examples to relate to the clients, not only from a cost perspective, but from a practicality perspective. That is really important, I think, to advance this agenda.
And a big topic at the moment, and one that's been on this podcast, especially when I spoke to Duncan Bacon-Brown, has always been about reuse and retrofit first sort of approach. What's your approach to that?
I think maybe I'll just speak as Mina here, but even at SOM, we really always would champion renovation if there is an existing building that is not detrimental to people's well-being. I think we would always find ways of renovating that building. Sometimes the commercial viability of a 2-story building that is, about to be falling apart does, from a commercial viability and other health and environmental impact perspectives, it may make more sense to demolish and build something new in the place, especially something new that is going to last much more longer, for centuries longer. But in most instances, if it's a substantial structure, we would always try to find ways, if not possible renovating the full, but at least keeping certain core elements of it that is going to minimize the overall environmental impact. I mean, I personally always want to talk about the perspective of the in between, and at SOM we also call it like sort of the gray zone. It's not because we always say either renovation or retrofit or sort of demolishing a new build. So it's like a black and white, but there is a gray zone in between. We don't need to necessarily renovate all the an existing building to its full extent if it's not viable anymore. When the materials are deteriorated, if there are parts of the structure that is not, stable anymore, there's no need to sort of put more material to it to be able to make sure that it stands as it is. But, we can keep most of the elements as relevant as it can be to ensure that we can minimize environmental impact from that perspective. So I think the gray zones should always be explored before we go down to the demolishing new builds scenario.
And I think we talked about innovation earlier. I think the innovation that's coming through now is really aiding that approach as well.
Exactly.
We're starting, we should be seeing our existing buildings as material banks.
Exactly.
You're absolutely right.
Exactly.
If they deteriorate and can't be reused, then how do we use those as a natural, as a resource into something else?
Exactly. Well? Exactly. And I think that's why we shouldn't be saddened by the fact that if we cannot renovate, and I'm speaking generally across the industry, if we cannot renovate an existing building as it is, and retain every single, screw on it, because, sometimes it just doesn't, it's just not healthy or not viable. But let's make sure that whatever we take off from that building, even if it's like a partial renovation, whatever we take off it goes back into the market as a secondary raw material. So it becomes a part of that circular economy system rather than completely being sent to landfill. So I think, there is that kind of responsibility, I think, that we often neglect to acknowledge. We always just look at the end product and we say, well, this building has only been saved 50%, and so it's not good. But no, the 50% has been saved on site, but 50% has also been saved in the market stream. And I think it's important to acknowledge that too.
Yeah, that's brilliant. We always finish the podcast with a few questions really around impact and one of my favourites here is trying to find out sort of what books. I mean, obviously your book has had a massive impact, but what books have had a significant impact on yourself or your career?
I think I there are many, but I'm such an avid book reader. But I think there's one that I really has stuck with me for a long time, will stick with me forever, is Eric Ries's The Startup Way. And it talks about sort of lean approach to innovation and leadership. And this has influenced both my sort of personal life approaches and also professional. But I find it fascinating because it really talks about sort of lean approach to iterative development and iterative design. It's always about learning, and it's not about the end product, but it's about the process. And it also talks about this validated learning, which he calls, and what it means that you need to use data and metrics to be able to measure your success. It cannot be just, this is nice to have, we think this, or I think this would be great if we did it this way. It's just, I think this would be great if we did it this way, and here is the data on it. So it's about the process, it's about data-driven decision making, and it's about, as a leader, as a sort of inspirational leader. I think he talks a lot about everyone should, as a leader, should be inspired and not necessarily manage, but inspire their teams and foster this culture of innovation and creativity and this empowerment to the team members that you're leading to really want to make a difference. And I think the sort of the principles and the mission behind those strategies and the vision that Eric Ries has in that book is really something that I deeply cherish and really apply, I think, more naturally in my work and daily life.
It's nice that you mentioned inspiration, because it sort of leads me on to my next question. And when I ask this to some of the podcast guests, your name comes up, and it's really about sort of maybe who's inspired you throughout your career. You're on some amazing committees and judging panels with some inspirational people, but I'd love to just...
Where do I start? There are so many. I do hope I don't want to upset anyone, but I'll just mention, I think, the few that have been quite pivotal, and this is not to dismiss or neglect or forget anyone else, because I think everyone that I converse with on a daily basis, it really inspires me to do something more on top of what I'm already doing or what I may not be doing. But I think I need to give a huge credit and acknowledgement to my boss, my mentor, my supervisor, Kent Jackson at SOM. I think he's really one of the main reasons of where I am today and who I am and how I've become to be who I am. So that's at SOM, and there are many other quite leading sort of inspirational figures at SOM that I'm very thankful for, but I want to single-handedly highlight him because he really has been a true mentor to me in my professional career to date. And in the industry, I think there are so many, but we briefly talked about even before the recording started, Simon Sturgis. He's been a quite pioneering individual figure across the industry, very respected, really pioneering in the way that he's been advancing this agenda of carbon that now has become more of our common language, even though we may not fully understand what it means. But he has been talking about this for a very long time. Or, my co-chair at the RIBA emergency and climate emergency task group, Duncan Baker Brown. I really admire him because his dedication and passion about really making people aware on the benefits of renovation and retrofit. And he's been, I would say, almost single-handedly carrying that torch really to, and because he's very passionate. And I know he was your first guest at this podcast, so anyone who hasn't listened to him, please listen to him. And he has a new book that has come out too. So I think he has been truly inspirational to me. And there are many, but I think also I would like to mention 3 more individuals that are very dear to my heart, and they really continue because they're very passionate about what they do. And it's Peter Oborn, who is the president of the Commonwealth Association of Architects. I met him many years ago at the RIBA's Ethics and Sustainable Development Commission. And I find an inspiration from him every time I talk to him because he always contextualizes the problems to almost like takes it to a universal context. And I find that actually really important. And also challenging at times, because often we may be quite focused on like our immediate sphere of influence or our immediate like physical walls of boundaries, and but the problems exist beyond these boundaries, and he always reminds me of that, which I'm very thankful for. And the last 2 is Julie Godfroy and Clara Bacanero George, who have been tirelessly really working across the industry, among with many others, really trying to make a change. And I admire them because they don't acknowledge barriers, and I'd say that in a good way, and they just go with their gut feelings, and they know, and of course they know their subject matter so well that they really want to make sure that people have the right understanding, the right tools to advance the carbon agenda. And they have great supporters and amazing true leaders such as David Partridge, who is the chair of the UK Net Zero Carbon Building Standards, and many others that are really holding their hand, if I can describe it that way, and our hand in this process to demonstrate that this is all possible and viable, and what we're dreaming of is not a dream and it can become a reality.
I think it's that relentless dedication and that makes the built environment so special. I think these individuals are really, we can make a big change. And sort of coming on to that, my last question for you is really what's your vision for the future?
So many dreams, but I think I want to be practical. So if we could do one thing tomorrow, my vision is that we all speak the same language. So if we could do one thing tomorrow, and I'm not going to be very popular by saying this, but if we could not mandate, but make sure that everyone across the built environment professional has the same base level of training, of understanding these complex, what may looks like it's complex, but it's actually very simple once you distill it down into these core themes and topics or priority areas, however we want to call them. Have a base level knowledge around those ones and have an understanding that they all link to each other. So we cannot just do net zero carbon buildings without really understanding the impact, both positive and negative, that those decisions on the journey of delivering a net zero carbon building may have on the natural environment, may have on materials and waste, may have on people's well-being. So the sort of understanding those interlinkages is really important. And I do hope with the climate framework, with RIBA Climate Guide, and many others that are going to come soon, we'll have the right tools that are freely accessible, or as much as possible. RIBA Climate Guide is unfortunately not freely accessible, but there are ways around getting that information. And I do hope at least the fundamentals of that information, and I do hope people can engage with it and want to sort of apply that knowledge into their practice, so that we can collectively move the industry much faster forward.
Right. I couldn't. Yeah. It's we've given them the tools, and it's just the collaboration now. So, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Martin.